Kashmir, India's crowning glory, has over the centuries remained another name for paradise itself. From Mughal rulers to present generations, people have fallen in love with the natural beauty of its landscapes, the vibrancy of its culture, the unmatched beauty of its gardens, and perhaps greatest of all, the Dal. Dal, the lake par excellence, is not only the lifeline of picturesque Kashmir Valley, but has been since time immemorial the center of Kashmir's civilization. Aptly called the jewel in the crown, the lake has contributed significantly towards the economy of the state. On the one hand, the lake has been the sanctum sanctorum for tourists. On the other, the floating gardens within the lake have been a source of food for the local population. Folklore has it that the Kashmir Valley was once a huge lake. Sage Kashyap is credited with having got the lake dried and making people settle in what is now the Kashmir Valley. Modern-day scientists, however, are yet to ascertain the origin of the lake. Based on the works of ancient historian Pandit Ratnakar's Ratnakar Puran, Tehreek-e-Hasan penned about 300 years before Kalhan's Raj Tarangani mentions that Kashmir Valley was a desert and was known as the Vitalani Marg. King Pravar Sen is said to have diverted river Behad, now called the Jhelum, from Naupora and got it to Kashmir. Another school of thought has it that it was King Durlabhvardhan, who ruled between 625 and 661 AD, who changed the desert into a lake called the Dal.
ये डल का जो लफ्ज़ी माने हैं, ये कहते हैं ठहरा हुआ पानी, उस जगह को कहते हैं जहाँ पानी ठहरा हुआ हो। ये लफ्ज़ है तिब्बती ज़बान का, क्योंकि तिब्बत हमारा हमसाया था और जिस वक्त एरेंचन शाह की हुकूमत थी, ये वो बुद्धिस्ट था, वो वहाँ से आया था और वो बाद में मुसलमान भी हो गया, तो उन्होंने इसको डल का नाम दे दिया।
Extensive research is being carried out to trace the origin of the lake. Pioneering work in this field was carried out by Danielle in 1922, Inex in 1978, and De Terra and Patterson in 1939. The theories put forward by these scientists have failed to arrive at a consensus tracing the origin, which still remains shrouded in mystery.
There are two schools of thought about the lake, evolution of lake. We don't know exactly the age of the lake, but one theory is that it is a post-glacial lake which has come into existence after geological transformations. The other theory is that river Jhelum, which was flowing in the close vicinity, some meandering action has taken place and the lake has come into existence.
Dal is probably the only lake of its kind in the world which has a virtual floating city on its aqua green waters. Over 300 houseboats that dot the lake are by far the greatest attraction for the Indian as well as the foreign tourist.
This is the oldest industry in Kashmir, and houseboat owners has contributed a lot towards the development of tourism in Kashmir.
Earlier, the valley had no hotels to boast of. Foreign tourists had to reach the Kashmir Valley on horse-drawn carriages and then hire boats called dongas to take them around the valley. These dongas served as lodging for their entire visit.
People were coming from Rawalpindi through JB Road on these tangas they were called it, ekas. Staying night or two at Baramulla, then selecting the boat there, small Dunga boat, not these, they came afterwards. And they were slowly coming to Srinagar. And it was the boat owner who was the host and who was the cook, who was the guide. And he was the man who sold Kashmir, the beauty of Kashmir, our mountains, the best places. It was the guide the houseboat owner who sold Kashmir to the outside world. I'm proud of it.
The concept of living in a houseboat on the Dal Lake is about 150 years old and is a tradition passed on by the British rulers who were known for their penchant for good life. British ranks spent their summers in the cool climes of the valley in the houseboats. Over the years, houseboats on the Dal have undergone major changes. Small houseboats have been replaced by two-storied structures which could make a grand hotel on land look pale in comparison. A great deal also goes into designing the boat's interiors, making them luxurious and palatial. The expensive carpets and exquisite carved wood furniture within the houseboat leave one awestruck. On the outside too are intricately carved designs and sculptures.
हर किस्म की सर्विस हमारे पास यहाँ पे है। मतलब ये जो रेट्स हमने आपको बोले ये इंक्लूडिंग मील्स है, इसमें सब ब्रेकफास्ट लंच डिनर सब इंक्लूड रहता है। तो हमारे पास सब रनिंग हॉट एंड कोल्ड वाटर सब एवरीथिंग, हर एक फैसिलिटी है जो हर एक बड़े 5 स्टार होटल में फैसिलिटीज़ होती है वो यहाँ पे भी हाउस बोट्स में प्रोवाइड की जाती है।
On the Dal, the chain of houseboats appear like a necklace around the lake, while the colorful shikaras look like gems which ferry people around.
फुल साइड से दिखाता है निशात, मुगल गार्डन्स, निगिन लेक्स, वलर लेक, गांधरबल लेक और झेलम, रिवर झेलम, उधर भी हम जाता है।
A ride on the shikaras transports one to another world. In the middle of the lake, a colony comprising 58 hamlets with a population of nearly 60,000 residents comes as a pleasant surprise. The residents are dependent on either agriculture or fishing. But is leading a life on water as easy as it appears to be?
डल लेक हमारे आदत है, हमारे बचपन यहाँ ही पैदा ही होते हैं हम लोग, यही हमको अब हमारे के लिए अच्छा है। हाँ बिल्कुल अच्छा है।
लेकिन यहाँ तो सर्दी बहुत ज़्यादा होती है।
हमको ये हमारा आदत होते है, हमको बचपन से इधर पढ़ता है, पैदाइशी होता है, उसी लेके आदत हमारे से आज तक होता ही है। आज हमको नहीं लगता है जाते रहने।
For the Dal Lake resident, his boat is his most prized possession. Since the boat is the only mode of transport, any mundane chore has to be carried out on it. Interestingly, every member of the family, both old and young, is adept at rowing and steering the vessel.
हमारे पास 2 है छोटे शिकारा।
तो अगर कुछ भी सामान खरीदना हो आना जाओ तो उसमें बैठ के ही जाना पड़ता है। खुद ही चला के जाते हैं।
खुद ही चलाते हैं।
अच्छा। तो घर में सबको आता है शिकारा चलाना?
हाँ ये पैदाइशी होता है सबको, इतना बच्चा वो इसको भी आता है सबको। फिर हमारा गाड़ी वो किश्ती पे चप्पा उठा था बस जाता उधर सिटी में।
Living on the waters of the beautiful Dal Lake sounds quaint and interesting at the same time. However, survival is not as easy. During winters, temperatures fall to sub-zero levels, making life difficult. But residents stock themselves up well in advance with household goods, making it seem like one long holiday.
हमारे घर में भी हीटिंग सिस्टम वगैरह रहता है।
क्या कहते हैं उसे?
इसको बुखारी बोलते हैं। इसमें थोड़ा सा लकड़ी अंदर डाल के कमरा एकदम बिल्कुल गर्म हो जाता है। आप ज़रा एक टी-शर्ट में अंदर घूम सकते हैं, ऐसा कोई मतलब कमरा एकदम कम्प्लीटली वार्म हो जाता है। तो बाहर निकलने के लिए हमने जैसे आप देख रहे हैं जंपर्स वगैरह पहने हैं, तो जैसे शूज़ वगैरह गर्म रखते हैं तो बाहर जाना हो तो ये कांगड़ी ये जो है जी इसमें चारकोल होता है, हीटिंग ये हम सुबह इसमें डाल दे तो पूरा दिन भर चलता रहता है। तो जिधर भी जाए इसके अंदर लेके पूरा बॉडी वार्म रख सकते हैं, हाथ वगैरह गर्म कर सकते हैं।
The state has been on the path of progress since independence, but the developmental process was eclipsed due to 10 years of militancy. Militancy dealt a body blow to the tourism industry and has had a direct bearing on the residents of Dal Lake who were solely dependent on this industry in all its forms. In 1975, while the state was still not plagued by militancy, 184,790 tourists came to Kashmir, whereas in 1991, only 6,287 tourists visited the valley. Battling all odds, the residents of Dal Lake eked out a living despite a near negligible tourist turnout.
पहले अच्छा सीज़न था, जिस वक्त हम शिकारा चला था, यहाँ बहुत रश होता था, बहुत टूरिस्ट आता था, भीड़ था बहुत, कम से कम 3-4 लाख टूरिस्ट आता था सीज़न में. अभी तो उतना नहीं आता है. समझो अभी 91, 92, 93, 94 तक कोई टूरिस्ट यहाँ नहीं रहता था. 4 साल.
उन दिनों आप क्या करते थे?
उन दिनों में यही कुछ मजदूरी करता था, और ये कम से कम ये समझो 20-30 रुपये दिन को कमाता था हम.
But militant activity was curbed after installation of a popular government in 1996. Once again, Dal Lake bounced back to life. Tourist influx increased to 16,138 in 1997. With the fresh inflow of tourists, the hustle and bustle of activity has returned.
शिकारा को उस वक्त के बहुत इधर बिजनेस रहता है, सयाह लोग बहुत इधर आता है, बहुत इधर काम चलता है. अच्छा तरह हम लोग खाते ही थे, कमाता भी अच्छा है मगर खाता भी अच्छा है.
The lake has its own floating shopper's paradise. A unique aspect of the floating bazaar is the fact that one can find almost all kinds of goods and handicrafts on board. This is one factor which makes Kashmir so special and famous. Though the state has a number of emporia, the floating bazaar has a charm of its own.
सुबह का टाइम जाता है, देखता है हाउस बोट पे कौन आया है, अगर आदमी होगा तो चलता है, उसको बोलता है आपको लेने का है, जब वो बोलेगा हाँ लेगा तो फिर हम दिखाता है उसको.
The lake is also endowed with several floating gardens, which are quite like the chinampas of old Mexico. The soil of these gardens is extremely fertile, and the best of vegetables come from here. Carrots, radish, spinach, and other vegetables are grown on the naturally rich soils of these floating gardens. An important feature in the life of a Dal Lake resident is the wholesale floating vegetable market, where all business transactions are carried out before sunrise. Vegetable growers from hamlets on the periphery of the lake also come in to sell their produce. Vegetables picked up from the floating markets are then sold on the streets of Srinagar through retail outlets.
यहाँ हमारा एक किश्ती है ना, किश्तियों में किश्ती खरीद लेता है, इसलिए किनारे पर हम कहाँ जाएगा. हमारा किनारा नेहरू पार्क की साइड में वहाँ उतना नहीं, क्योंकि डल लेक में जो लोग रहते हैं ना उनका गुजारा भी चलते हैं इसी पर. अगर हम लोग उधर जाएगा तो हम यहाँ का लोग जो बेचते हैं शहरों में वो गलियों में जाता है, रेडे पर लेता है, मगर जो अगर हम उधर ले जाएगा मतलब यहाँ का जो लोग हैं उनका रोजे पर हमला हो जाएगा.
The original settlers around the lake were gardeners who tended to the gardens of Mughal emperors. Later, they became agriculturalists. Some earned their living by providing shikara facilities to tourists. However, after independence, they have marched with the country along the path of progress. With the passage of time, residents have realized the importance of sending their children to schools. With education showing them the way, children prefer to take up jobs elsewhere. There is also a shift in professions. Those who were earlier shikara owners or agriculturalists are moving into other areas. Women now contribute towards shawl manufacturing, and some have taken to carpet production. A large segment of the population comprises of fishermen, whose families have been residing here for centuries. They have made good use of the aqua life present in the fertile Dal Lake.
इधर मिलता है, ये है छोटा आती है, बड़ा आती है, पंजाबी है इधर, पॉम्पलेट, इधर कश्मीरी छोटा, कश्मीरी ब्याक ज़ात बड़ा हो गया, रामगुरुन, आरगुरुन,
150, पौनी 200, 100 बस इतना पैसा कमाता है बस.
तो गुजारा चल जाता है?
हाँ गुजारा चलता है, ठीक है, आराम से चलता है।
We had about 25 species of fish in the Dal Lake, but unfortunately, because of the introduction of the exotic mirror corp, the number of our local fish species have decreased, and the population is decreasing. And I am afraid that number of fish species have even gone because of the continuous pollution loads in the Dal Lake.
All these fish hatch twice a year, and the prime reason for their large number is the aquatic weed, which forms the main part of their diet.
There are about 40 to 45 species of the aquatic weeds. Some of them are very indigenous to Dal Lake. And then I said just now the fish species. And likewise, we have number of this flora and the fauna comprising of animals, plants. That is why we have the freshwater lake. This is a typical freshwater lake, which has a typical biodiversity.
Migratory and local birds that dot the Dal Lake throughout the year deserve special mention. They leave the lake complete in all its natural finery. The avifauna is an inseparable feature of this spectacular lake. Research reveals that the emergent zones of the Dal Lake are the most sought-after breeding grounds for these birds. The main species of local birds found around the Dal Lake include the pheasant-tailed jacana, white-spotted fan-tailed flycatcher, common kingfisher, wagtails, and chakurs. A variety of migratory birds are regular visitors to the lake. They fly in at night in search of food and return to their original habitats at Hokarsar, Sarband, Nakara, and Anchar at dawn. Located on the southwest of Srinagar, the Dal is surrounded by the sacred shrines of Shankaracharya, Chashm-e-Shahi, and Hazrat Bal. The serene lake has fallen victim to human avarice in the worst possible fashion. Earlier, the lake had a treasure trove of plants, including rhizomes of lotus and its sweet nuts. The banks had verdant borders laced by pragmites and typha used for mat weaving. The lake once had sweet and crystal clear water, which made it almost transparent. In times gone by, one could sight a fish by merely looking in the water. Today, the lake is a poor shadow of its past, and the quality of water is constantly declining. The main reason has been the unplanned growth of population around the lake.
The main problems the Dal Lake is facing is number one, the siltation, due to the felling of trees in the upper catchment areas. Then second is the encroachment problem. The people who are trying to come near to the lake, and then those people who are living within the lake, they are encroaching fast and changing water body into a land mass, first into floating ground, ultimately land masses for their agricultural activities. And then the third is what we call as the problems like pollution, the nutrient entry of the effluents into Dal Lake from the we don't have any unfortunately drainage or sewerage system in this entire city, and I should say that most of the city area, the effluents of the city area directly go untreated into the Dal Lake, and certain parts have become mere cesspools.
The damage caused to the lake by human settlements has been so intense that the open area of the lake, which was 75 square kilometers in 1200 AD, has today shrunk to a mere 15 square kilometers. According to consultant engineers Bapti Shaw and Merton, the Dal can't even be called a lake, as only 56% of the area has open waters. The rest has been encroached upon by orchards, trees, buildings, floating gardens, and houseboats. A survey conducted by the Minor Ports Organization in 1982 revealed that the total area of the lake had been reduced to 24 square kilometers, of which 15.42 square kilometers is that of the water bodies. Marshland occupies 1.26 square kilometers, and constructions and buildings occupy 7.32 square kilometers.
There are hundreds of floating gardens within the lake, but the people have a tendency of transforming these floating gardens into hard land mass, thereby shrinking the area of the lake.
The beautiful silvery fish that rendered an extra shade of beauty to this pristine lake have ended up in museums and remain mute testimony to the most beautiful lake in the world. Mindless pollution of the Dal Lake has pushed these beautiful aqua creatures to extinction. A number of varieties of fish, now extinct, are reported to have found their way here from Central Asia during the second interglacial era. As a sharp contrast, the novel varieties have been replaced by those fish which can survive in polluted water. The lake has been dispossessed of its aquafauna beauty. Today, 75% of the lake's fish fauna comprises the common carp. Clean water varieties, including the Schizothorax socianus and Schizothorax niger, are constantly on the decline. Pollution has not spared even the aquatic weeds. Till recently, Potamogeton, Hydrilla, and Myriophyllum were the main species of weeds. These weeds have been replaced by Nymphois peltata, which has covered almost 29.2% of the lake. What has also alarmed researchers is that the weed Urale ferox salisp has suddenly disappeared from the lake's waters. The main factor responsible for the fast depleting aquaflora and aquafauna has been the unprecedented and heartless encroachment on the beautiful Dal. Residents have now started assembling the floating gardens together, and apart from farming on its fertile soil, they've also started residing here. The cruelties perpetrated on the Dal do not stop here. Those residing by the banks of the Dal are using the lake as a big garbage dump. The 740 houseboats and 12 hotels on the Dal Lake dispose their waste directly into the lake with impunity. As a result, there is an excessive growth of weeds, affecting water quality and in turn the fauna of the lake. However, the installation of a popular government has augured well for the lake in turmoil. The government has initiated measures on a war footing to bring back the lake's lost glory. The Lake and Waterways Development Authority has been constituted to spruce up the lake.
We were advised to prepare a project feasibility report comparable to any international report so that it could be posed to any international funding agency for funding. The project report was prepared in 1997 itself. The project has been approved at a cost of 297 crores rupees in principle for conservation only.
After a thorough survey conducted by the Lake and Waterways Development Authority, 4 main sources of nutrients were found. These include nutrients coming from natural runoffs, erosion in the catchment area, wastewater from the inhabitants residing in the peripheral areas of the lake, surface runoffs, and infiltration from agricultural activity along the lake coast.
If you will just go and see the boulevard, underneath they put those, pipes. And they face the pipes, it is underneath the road, and they are facing straight towards Dal Lake. Now tell me, the pollution, there were people living, all there, and especially at the time of rain, when it was raining. The silt was coming and straightly going into Dal Lake.
The government has initiated several measures to bring back the lost glory of the lake. These include afforestation and soil conservation in Dachigam and Dara Danihama catchment area, trapping of debris and sediments from the catchment area by way of construction of settling basin at Telbal, marginal dredging of all marsh areas, acquisition of land and structure within the lake body involving 6,000 canals of land and 3,741 structures, and relocation of affected families, prevention of pollution by way of diversion of sewage and drainage from the peripheries of the lake, houseboat sanitation and sewage treatment to plants, establishment of eco-monitoring laboratory, de-weeding operations, and solid waste management. However, the most difficult task the government is faced with remains the eviction of those who have occupied the Dal Lake. Those residing within the Dal Lake, on the one hand, pose a serious threat to the already depleting health of the lake. On the other, these residents have become an inseparable part of the lake. The government has made elaborate plans to rehabilitate those residing within the lake. These residents have been promised plots of land and employment away from their most beloved lake. The government is making all-out efforts to allow these residents to start life afresh.
गवर्नमेंट को भी हमने इल्तिजा किया है कि हमें यहाँ से उठाए, कहीं और जगह लीजिए जहाँ हमें आराम पहुँचे। ये किश्तिया की जगह भी मिले, पानी वहाँ होना चाहिए जहाँ हमें आराम पहुँचना चाहिए। अगर गवर्नमेंट हम भी यहाँ को ले जाए, जिस काम के बदले कोई और काम रखे, तो वो हमारे लिए अच्छा होगा।
Subject to availability of funds, we are in a position to complete the project within 4 to 5 years.
While militancy had pushed the state back by a decade, the extraordinary resilience demonstrated by the people of Kashmir could well be a fresh beginning in more ways than one. A lake which inspired poets, thinkers, philosophers, as well as the average tourist, today stands at the threshold of a fresh lease of life. With active support from the government, the Dal will once again attain the status of a lake par excellence.